Welcome again to the next video on the 50 minerals that change the course of history. This is the 7th mineral, and in Latin its name is Amiantos. In English its name is much different, but a little different. It's Asbestos. And if there's one name that strikes fear into people who work with buildings, it is having to clean up asbestos. So let's get into this and see how asbestos changed the course of history, for the good and for the ill. It is a silicate mineral. That means it is based on silicon and oxygen, and it is extracted from 6 serpentine and amphibole minerals. And you can see the chemical formulas up here. Some are magnesium and some are iron, but they have the thing in common that silicon, oxygen, and then there's a hydroxide in there too. Although it might appear that divine providence has provided humans with a range of minerals, each one suited to a stage of their technological development, in a few instances, a material once thought to be a boon to humanity turned out to be a curse. Such is the case of asbestos, whose use triggered the most complex, costly, and long-lasting industrial illness and injury litigation in history. Litigation is lawsuits. Section 1. The miracle fabric. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew that cloth woven from asbestos, or more correctly amiantos, was not damaged by fire. They considered it to be a magical material that warded off evil influences. They also had practical uses for this mineral, to make everlasting wicks for funerary lamps, because remembering those who passed away is not a new thing. It goes back to the beginning. They also used it as a shroud for cremations. It allowed bodies to be burned, and the mortal remains kept separate from the ashes of the funeral pyre. It's very important. You don't want to mix the ashes. Right? The human ashes are those that are special. The wood ashes or coal or charcoal or whatever is not. The 1st century Roman writer and naturalist Pliny the Elder, although he made many errors in his description of the mineral, was among the first to note that asbestos weavers suffered from respiratory diseases. Their lungs suffered for some reason. Despite this early awareness of the health hazards of asbestos, it would take another 2 millennia and countless deaths for its use to be controlled in the developed world. So this is an anciently used mineral, used for what we used it up until very recently. This is not something we just found in the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution, as with many of the previous things with aluminum and that sort of stuff. Also, Pliny the Elder, he knew about fire. He witnessed the eruption of Vesuvius, the volcano that destroyed the city of Pompeii, and he went to rescue some of the people. He brought his navy in. He literally had a navy, and loaded up the ships, but he was not himself able to escape before the fumes killed him. And his nephew, whom he adopted as his own legal son, Pliny the Younger, wrote about it in his histories. So, during the Middle Ages, there are a few references to asbestos cloth. The Emperor Charlemagne, who lived from 747 to 814, he was the first emperor of the Romans in Western Europe since the 5th century, since 476 officially. So, you know, it's been about 300 years without an emperor. He himself was a Frank, a descendant of the barbarians who had brought the Western Roman Empire to an end. Frank is one of the Germanic tribes. A lot of the others you probably have also heard of, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths. They each have their place in history, but right now we're looking at how asbestos changed the course of history. Well, anyway, Charlemagne had a tablecloth made of asbestos. After meals, he liked to amaze his dinner guests by throwing the cloth into the fire to clean it, and then pulled it from the flame. That's the 7:50 a.m. bell telling 0-hour students to get to class. Pope Alexander III and the mythical Prester John, believed to be the ruler of a Christian kingdom in Central Asia, were also both said to have robes that were woven from asbestos. Now, I'm not sure exactly when Pope Alexander III lived, but it was somewhere in those Middle Ages. The rarity of asbestos in pre-industrial times, combined with the much shorter lifespan of average humans anyway, meant that deaths caused by exposure to the mineral would have been minimal. They would have died of something else. Its widespread industrial use in the developed world dates only to the 19th century. So although it wasn't discovered and developed in the 1800s, that's when its use exploded. At first, asbestos was woven into fabric to be used as insulation. By the 20th century, asbestos was widely used in buildings, in fire-retardant coatings, concrete bricks, pipes, pipe insulation, flooring, ceiling materials, roofing, garden furniture, fireproof drywall. Everything you don't want to burn, asbestos was this wonderful, wonderful mineral to line things with so your buildings didn't burn down. In the 1950s, so some of your grandparents may have been born then, the American cigarette brand Kent introduced the first filter-tip cigarette which used asbestos in its patented micronite filters. Another major source of asbestos particles in the environment was due to its use to make the brake pads and shoes of automobiles until the 1990s. Again, you don't want your brakes to burn as you're slowing down your car. So it's a wonderful material that will not burn, but unfortunately its fibers do get into your lungs over time. Asbestos is not one mineral. It's made up of 6 different fibrous minerals. It's made of chrysotile, or is it chrysolite? I think there might be a typo in the book. Amosite, anthophyllite, actinolite, crocodolite. It sounds like crocodile, but the vowels are different. And tremolite. The fibers of chrysotile, well, since it persists in spelling it that way, it must not be a typo. My mistake. The fibers of chrysotile are serpentine. That means they're curly, like a serpent, like a snake. And those of the other five, are amphibole. They're needle-shaped. So chrysotile, known as white asbestos, is the most commonly found asbestos mineral in Earth's crust, and it's 95% of asbestos products. The remaining 5% are made up of amosite, brown asbestos, which is mined in South Africa, as so many things are, and crocodolite, or blue asbestos, mined in South Africa and Australia. That is the most dangerous to humans, the blue asbestos. The world's current leading producers of asbestos are Canada and Russia, kind of the opposite ends of the world from South Africa and Australia. That's mostly the good stuff about asbestos. It's very plentiful, it's cheap, it works. It makes fires not happen. And it's something that's been rather easy to use, and for most of human history, it didn't really affect humans because something else was going to kill us anyway, some disease or lack of nutrition, war perhaps. Although wars actually didn't kill nearly as many people as disease and malnutrition did. Now we get into section 2, the invisible killer. Asbestos is not a poison that kills quickly by attacking and breaking down a body's tissues and organs, the way that arsenic and mercury do. Typically, illness and death from asbestos-related diseases are caused by exposure to the mineral over a long period of time. Most victims are men and women who have worked in asbestos mining, much like coal miners are the ones who get black lung. Or they've worked in asbestos manufacture, as well as family members who have been exposed to dust that was brought home on the clothes and bodies of asbestos workers. Another group who is at risk are construction workers who regularly handle or remove asbestos materials when renovating buildings. Practically all the buildings in America that are larger were built to a certain code that required them not to burn. You don't want buildings burning down on people, and so they had to line their buildings with asbestos. Well, when they get renovated, then they have to get that asbestos removed and other fire retardants put in instead. And so that process can knock a lot of shards of asbestos loose, so you have to wear those N95 masks. That's principally what those were made for before COVID came around. Well, let's see here. However, to reassure those readers who may have been exposed to asbestos while carrying out their own home improvements, they're very unlikely to fall ill from a single exposure. Just a few months of working at it isn't going to hurt you. It's year after year after year working at it. That's the danger. The fibers of asbestos are composed of extremely fine, fragile molecular lattices. Even carrying finished asbestos products will disturb and break the fibers into microscopic pieces that are invisible to the naked eye, and cause them to be released into the environment where humans will inhale them. Now, since this is kind of brittle, it makes me think that they're not actually molecular lattices, but ionic lattices, but no matter. Long-term exposure to asbestos fibers is associated with two diseases: asbestosis, makes sense. Any osis is an irritation, so it's irritation from asbestos, and mesothelioma, and that is a condition that you may have heard of before. The former, asbestosis, is a chronic inflammation of the lungs caused by scarring by asbestos fibers. In the most advanced and severe cases, the reduction of lung capacity may induce respiratory or heart failure and lead to death. On the other hand, mesothelioma is an asbestos-related cancer of the mesothelium. So it's a cancer, not just irritation. And the cancer attacks the protective lining that covers the body's internal organs. All the organs have a layer that protects them, helps keep them separate from each other, but not detached. It helps them hold together. Now, symptoms of mesothelioma may not appear until 20 to 50 years after asbestos exposure. So again, if you live back in the Middle Ages and if you made it to 5 years old, chances were very good you would make it to 50, but probably not to 70. So if you're dying at 55, there was absolutely no way that it was from the asbestos. It was going to be something else, heart disease or something. You know, people didn't brush their teeth back then, and that is a major way for germs to get into your body through your gums, through your bleeding gums, and then they attack your heart, and then it's game over. Now, Pliny, remember Pliny the Elder, he warned about the danger of asbestos, but those warnings went unheeded until the late 19th century. In 1899, the British pathologist Montague Murray conducted a post-mortem on the body of an asbestos factory worker and testified he had found asbestos fibers in the man's lungs, which he believed had contributed to his death. Subsequent cases in the US and UK provided mounting evidence of a link between the disease and the material. But the first diagnosis of asbestosis was not made in the UK until 1924. Sometimes these things take a while, for people to wake up. A firm link between asbestos and mesothelioma was established in the 1940s, and by then, major U.S. asbestos manufacturers had realized the dangers to their workers and sponsored their own medical research into asbestos-related diseases, but on the condition that the findings be kept secret. So in the 1920s, with the firm establishment that asbestosis was caused by asbestos, the factory owners did make sure to protect their workers, finally. And then later on, when mesothelioma, the cancer that was caused by it, they would also, further evidence that they needed to be protecting their workers, but keep it secret. In the 1980s, governments across the developed world, the first world, began to act to control the importation and use of asbestos products. So the European Union, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand instituted total bans on the use of asbestos, and they instituted asbestos removal legislation from schools, hospitals, and other public buildings, later from private homes. But sadly, asbestos continues in widespread use in many countries in the developing world. That used to be called the Third World. You might ask what the Second World is, and I'll let you look that up on Wikipedia. The Second World is pretty much gone. In 1989, the Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S. issued the asbestos ban and phase-out rule. The rule was challenged and overturned in the courts in 1991, which means asbestos can still be used in consumer products in the U.S. The first lawsuits filed by asbestos workers began in the 1920s. Class action suits continue to this day, being the most complex and lengthy litigations in history, with an estimated cost of $200 billion in the U.S. alone. Now, if you're a manufacturer and you know that you could get sued and lose all this money, are you going to continue to use asbestos? Well, a lot have decided to. And there's a little side blurb based on Pliny's life, and I'll go ahead and read that too. What's in a name? To be absolutely correct, we should call asbestos Amiantos. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder mistakenly applied the word asbestos to the fibrous material that could be woven into a fire-resistant fabric. He actually applied the misnomer. Asbestos means unextinguishable. And actually that was supposed to be calcium oxide, quicklime, a mineral that heats up when it's in contact with water. So he knew about one white substance and he applied the name to a different white substance, but the name stuck because everybody read Pliny. He wrote so much that was correct, nobody noticed the wrong word there. Pliny ascribed magical properties to the material, to amiantos, which means undefiled. It affords protection against spells, especially those of the Magi. He believed again, mistakenly, it was a vegetable and not mineral origin. That is to say, he thought that it grew from plants. He didn't realize that it was a geological thing, a mineral. Remember, these are the 50 minerals that changed the course of history. So for a lot of people who have been affected by asbestos in their lungs, whether the workers with it or people who have tried to remove it, it has been something that has cost them a lot. On the other hand, we don't know how many more buildings would have burned down and lives lost if they hadn't used it for a while. But now we have other materials that we've developed through science that do not flake apart and make, make for dangerous working conditions, at least as far as we know. That is the end for that chapter, and thank you for watching, and I hope that you gleaned something interesting from it. Have a good day.